The British government has a new prime minister, Keir Starmer, after some elections on July the 4th, ended up changing the government there. And now then we no longer have Rishi Sunak, but Keir Starmer. And that was, of course, it was just right on the cusp of beginning the NATO summit. And Keir Starmer was very intent on kind of putting his mark on what the British government's going to do. He didn't take any time at all to talk about where he was going to go with the government and where he was going to take with their defense policies. Those have some interesting questions, though, because are their policies of the new British government working more toward peace for UK and ultimately towards NATO, or are they helping drive us closer to the potential for major war with a nuclear armed superpower? That's an incredibly important question that we want to get to today, and we have nobody better to discuss that than Ian Puddick, the smartest man in London. Ian, welcome back to the show. Always love having you on.
You're so kind to me. Nobody says that, by the way. Nobody, not even the people that work with me. Thank you very, very much. My mum doesn't even say that. But,
well, that's unfortunate because we need to educate them a little bit more, because you've proven on this show with the things that you say, the things that have very often come to pass, that is the case. But let's get into some specifics here. Because I just wonder, even before, if I show some of the clips that we're going to discuss here today, what is the situation with the British population? I mean, obviously they voted in quite large numbers. I think, if I recall correctly, it was if not an all-time record high, certainly more than they've had in quite some time. So people seem to be really unhappy, and they brought in this new government. What is the significance of why so many people went to the polls?
Well, it's the opposite. It's the opposite. So it was actually almost an all-time near low turnout for voting, and the reason that the voting numbers were so poor was we've got a two-party system. We've got the Conservatives, i.e. the Republicans, and we've got Labour, the equivalent of the Democrats, and there's no difference between them. They're both warmongering parties, which I'm sure we'll be talking about shortly. The policies, as George Galloway would say, is they're both cheeks of the same backside. It's absolutely true. Apart from the fact that it's funny, it's true. You could get a cigarette paper in between the policies of both parties. And the Tories have, the Tories have had their run for their money for the last 14 years. We've got record food banks. The NHS, the health system, is in a crisis. It's always in a crisis. The military, the Ministry of Defence, can't recruit numbers, yet they're spending loads of money. So everything is broken. So when people went out to vote, did they go, yeah, let's vote for change, let's go for Labour? No, because they know that Labour is just going to repeat the same policies that the Conservatives had. So the turnout was actually incredibly low, and Labour got in with record numbers by default because of the voting system that we've got. So yeah, there's no change really. No change.
Yeah, I'm sorry. Sad. I think actually I was referring to the French elections, which happened right about the same time, and they did have a lot of record turnout here. Sorry, I got those two juxtaposed there. But let's look a little bit more fundamentally. Why is it, and how is it that the equivalent of the Republicans and Democrats are so similar in policies that there's no point in voting for one over the other? Why won't one? I mean, just in the normal desire to be elected and just differentiate yourself from your opponent, why would they have different policies for the different parties? Has it always been this way, or is this a new situation?
Well, it's just mission creep, really. So it's just happened over a long period of time. So if you take Labour, we'll talk about Labour now, because obviously they're in power, they've got the authority, they've got the mandate to try and bring about change. So Sir Keir Starmer, who's just a puppet of the state anyway, and if you look at his history, it's just another puppet of the state. It's the easiest way to describe it, really. What did he turn around? So he turned around and thanked the electorate for voting him and his party in. And what did he say? First thing he said, we are a government for the people. And he went on to say how all of the mandates from the government will be focused on the working man and woman, for working people, and to make their lives better and to lift the crushed and all this kind of guff. I mean, it sounds great if you do it, but they don't. So there's the rhetoric, there's the mission and what we're going to do. What's the first thing he does? The first thing he does is he meets the Americans, meets NATO, and talks about the defense and Putin and war and war and war. And hang on, all this stuff about this wonderful thing about how we're going to help the oppressed and help working people. You know, that was in his first objective. I always judge a person not by what they say, but by what they do. And I think that's, you know, it's largely, it's not always true. It's not always a fair thing to say, but it's largely true that, you know, people behave by type, if that's it. So he said all the right things, the things that you would expect the leader of any party to say, and then bang, straight into war. You know,
yeah. So I want to actually look into that. So, and now really to use your cigarette paper analogy, I'm going to show something that he said. One of the first things that he said regarding the military policy. And what really struck me as I was listening to this is if I had just covered my eyes and couldn't see who was talking, I would wonder if I was listening to Keir Starmer, Rishi Sunak, or Boris Johnson, because they all sound the same in terms of the words that are coming out of their mouth. Watch this.
We have pledged 40 billion euros of support to Ukraine every year. We've established a new body to coordinate that support, agreed to ramp up industrial production, and confirmed Ukraine's irreversible path to full NATO membership. As I told President Zelensky today, NATO will be stronger with Ukraine as a member. And because of the generational threat from Russia, that demands a generational response. So we will increase NATO's focus on future threats around the world, with Britain playing its full role. We will continue to put our armed forces at NATO's disposal, maintain our presence in Estonia and Poland, lead the land arm of the Allied Response Force this year, and maintain and modernise our nuclear deterrent.
Okay, there's a number of things I want to talk about here. That was a really meaningful statement that he made there, and you've kind of alluded to it in your previous comments there. But the first one I want to look at is just kind of fundamentally. He said NATO will be stronger with Ukraine in it. I don't see any evidence that adding the corrupt and the war-torn country of Ukraine will in any way make NATO stronger. What did he mean by that?
Well, he's, I said earlier in my introduction that he's a puppet of the state. So I don't know if you have the clips. I don't know what you have prepared. But it's shown on social media, left, right, and centre. You probably won't see it on TV. It may be broadcast once on mainstream TV, but it's plastered everywhere on social media. So he's asked, so Keir Starmer, the Prime Minister, what's more important to you? What do you prefer? The British Parliament or Davos? And he says Davos. You get to meet all of these leaders of the world, the corporations, and where the real influence is. And he gave the game away, because I'm sure that's true. I'm sure that's absolutely true. You know, who wants to be in a boring old parliament, you know, rowing with conservatives and independents about broken roads and, you know, all that kind of stuff? He wants to be, he's part of that club. He's part of that club. And I think I messaged you at the weekend. I was Alexander McCurris's daughter's christening. And after when we went back to Alexander's home, I was talking to a former French diplomat all about what's happening in the current world conditions. But I had so many questions for her about, you know, are we in Europe all vassals? And the answer is yes. She didn't have to think about it. She said yes. And what was even more shameful, she did this. She said, you guys are even worse. You guys over there, Britain, are even worse than the French. And I said, I know. I'm ashamed to say it, of course. Of course.
Man.
And she was right. She was absolutely right. So
Gary actually just found that clip you're talking about. Let's play it real quick. Go ahead, roll that.
Let's just ask you quickly. You have to choose now between Davos or Westminster.
Davos.
Why?
Because Westminster is too constrained. And, you know, it's closed and we're not having meaning. Once you get out of Westminster, whether it's Davos or anywhere else, you actually engage with people
Oh
who you
man.
see working with in the future.
Yeah, but you
Westminster is
don't.
just a
Yeah,
tribal
okay.
What about democracy?
shouting place.
Let's just ask you quickly.
Yeah,
You
and
have
it's
to choose now
that's his
between-
country.
Yeah,
Davos is not
what
his
about-
country.
What about democracy? What about the people that elected you into that house to represent them to make change? Didn't give a monkey's. And when Emily Maitlis asked him, he didn't blink. Parliament, Davos, answered Davos. Didn't blink. He didn't have to think about
And
it.
you can see her reaction. I think she, of course, expected him to say Westminster, but
Of course.
she
Not at
was
all.
taken by surprise too.
So he's our man. He's our leader. It's what can I say? It's very depressing. And this
Now,
is the
to
reason
add
that
to
people
that,
don't know.
consistent with that behavior, one of the other things he said in the clip that I showed there was that he wanted to put the British armed forces at the disposal of NATO, not like that we want to all work together for our common security, but to hand it over to NATO to use as they see fit. That seemed like that wouldn't even be popular within Britain population, even among his supporters, that, hey, hang on, our armed forces are for our national defense, not for the use by NATO as they see fit. Was there any pushback on that?
Well, NATO's a foreign power. NATO is not Great Britain. NATO is not France. It's not Germany. I mean, if anything, it's America. It's American soft power, and we're all members of the club. So because we're all members of the club, we subscribe to its authority, and we're happy to hand over our boys and girls to die for NATO. It's absolute nonsense. It's absolutely, and I feel unpatriotic saying that. I'm not against the army. I recognise the need for armies, for defence, for helping out, for humanitarian aid, but not for all these wars of oil and taking out people that we don't like because of democracy and all the aftermath. No one thinks through the aftermath, and it's always a disaster. I'm not for all of that. My little boy's not going to be dying for any of that nonsense, I can assure you. It's crazy. Absolutely crazy.
So the third thing that he said in that clip was that this is a generational struggle for Great Britain. So not only is he handing the British armed forces over for the use by NATO, but he also says that this is a generational issue for Great Britain. So he wants, whether it's your son or those that are rising up maybe in front of him, to be put on the block for this. But how is that going down in Britain? Now, are the people in Britain okay with that? Is that something that's just common knowledge over there?
Well, do you know what? There's voter apathy, as we already discussed in the introduction. So people turned out in low numbers because the status quo is rubbish, being kind. The alternative, which is now what we've got, is the same as the rubbish. So how can the average man on the street affect real change? Because he or she can't, because we just have the same thing and the same thing. So people are apathetic. So what do? People don't know. So people just give up caring. Most people, I've said this in previous discussions with you, most people of a certain age aren't on social media. You and I are engaged in this because we're interested. We want to know what's going on. If we can do anything positive to encourage or help or improve things, we want to do that. But most people just want to go to work, look after their families, go on holiday, live their lives, moan about how rubbish everything is, go on Facebook and maybe have a little rant about whoever is in power and what they may or not be doing. But that's about it. So that's the problem, that apathy, I think, if that makes sense.
Yeah, and certainly we see that's among some in the United States. Although we probably are a little bit more angry on their sides right now, so it's not quite as much apathy at the moment. Not that that's necessarily a good thing. Want to look at one other thing that Keir Starmer said. It's also seemingly contradictory. He talks about in this clip here, he wants to see Britain in calmer waters. Watch this.
Our country needs a bigger reset, a rediscovery of who we are, because no matter how fierce the storms of history, one of the great strengths of this nation has always been our ability to navigate a way to calmer waters. And yet this depends upon politicians.
Now, one would think that moving to calmer waters would mean that you would want to be moving away from conflict, away from any potential for war, that you'd want to be using diplomacy to bring those calmer waters, because that part makes a lot of sense to me as a Westerner, as just a regular human being. But then not far after he made that speech, he made this other one to Zelensky, I think, where he seems to be moving in a different direction.
I just had a very good meeting with President Zelensky where I made it absolutely clear that as far as the UK is concerned, the change of government makes no difference to the support that we will provide. We've been united on this when we were in opposition. It was really important to me to be able to affirm that face-to-face in the meeting. I did speak to him immediately after I was sworn in as Prime Minister last week, because it is an opportunity for our Labour government to reaffirm our commitment to NATO. We obviously signed the original treaty way back. We reaffirm today, but also to discuss with President Zelensky what further support that he needs.
Okay, here's what I need you to explain to me. Now, I can at least understand why he might want to say stuff about NATO. As he said, their original signatory. Britain's been a leading member of NATO from the outset. So that makes a little bit more sense. But he was making so much difference. He said one of the first people he called as prime minister was Zelensky. He wanted to reassure Zelensky. Why is he so worried about Zelensky?
Because he's bought the Kool-Aid. He's bought into the narrative. He's now an integral part of the narrative in terms of making it happen. You know, going back to I'm answering your question. I'm not digressing from your question. When I had that long chat with the former French diplomat, and you know, she teased me, and she was right, by the way, by saying that Britain is more of the States than the French. They are a little bit more independently minded, which I think is probably true, unfortunately. I said, why? There's the $1 million question. Why? Why are we puppets of America? Why? And how does that happen? Because that's the important thing. Because once you know why and how it happens, you can address the issues to perhaps try and change things. And she said it's all of these non-elected bodies like Davos, the World Economic Forum. And when you look at the various leaders in Europe, they have come through these paths and via big organizations, whether it be banking or investment banking, or the WEF, or via organizations associated with Davos. So they all come, and if you look at this as a religion, they all come from the same belief system. And they congregate in their own countries, and then they all come together and sing the NATO hymn. And that's the sad reality of it. So, you know, once he's finished being prime minister, he'll go off and run a big organization, whether it be a bank or a big reinsurance company, on huge money because of his connections through all of these organizations, which he was very wise to say at the beginning, and at least he was honest to say that he preferred Davos to Westminster. And that's the problem we're in, if that makes sense. It's very depressing.
Yeah. Okay, let's look at a couple of different players here, because everything is complicated. Everything is multi-layered, and this is certainly no exception. So we've looked a lot at Keir Starmer specifically. Let's look at some of the other players. First of all, let's look at what Zelensky said in response to the gift that he got from Keir Starmer.
I heard and so all the messages from your government and team and from people in United Kingdom. We are very thankful for your words and steps, which were important. Thank you that you are with us from the very beginning of the war. Thanks for all the military and financing packages and support. Thank you very much.
So he's very grateful for that. Obviously, he's the one who's leading the country that's been invaded by Russia. I get that. Although, as we've talked about many times, that the military, when you look at it from an unemotional and an analytical position, there is absolutely no possibility that Ukraine is going to be able to eject Russia to win in any kind of definition. Whether he gets all the support, a middle support, a little support, or all of your armed forces, it won't make any difference.
No.
So then that leads to the question then, does the British military see things any differently? Now, again, going back to what Keir Starmer has said, and you and I have been engaging on this some off camera. Initially, he said, yes, the British Storm Shadow can be used anywhere in Russia. And then you said he kind of backed off of that a little bit, but it had, as this Sky News piece here shows, actually, this is something that Lord Cameron had actually authorized, at least to some degree, earlier. And it doesn't appear that this part was walked back. When the subject came up that Russia said, if you do this, there are going to be consequences. Here's what Sky News reported on.
When this policy was first announced a couple of months ago from David Cameron, Russia's foreign ministry said that any UK military facility or military hardware could now become a target for Russia, whether inside Ukraine or outside. And it's that threat of retaliation that the new Labour government is clearly wary of, as articulated on Sky News this morning by the new Security Minister, Dan Jarvis.
Of course, we've got to guard against that, and of course, we've got to be incredibly careful. But what's most important is that in concert with our NATO allies, we work together to make sure that President Zelensky and Ukraine have got the material support that they need to defend themselves against Russia. It is an illegal invasion, the consequences of which are massive for the whole of the world, and we stand shoulder to shoulder with our allies in doing what we can to support our colleagues in Ukraine.
Now, he kind of answered my question here, and I want you to elaborate a little bit. Don't the military know that it's not a winnable solution? And yet you heard him say there, implying that he thinks maybe it is possible. And so that's why they want to give them, quote, all they need to succeed, only they're not going to. How does that play in? What you deal with people in the military a lot with your job there. So I wonder if you can tell me what they're saying.
Yeah, I mean, I was so last Thursday I was at Sandhurst, the military training college, and they bring officers from all over the world, from various nations, to be trained there to the appropriate standards. So I was there last Thursday, and then in the evening we went out for a beer and a curry, and that's where the real conversations were had. But yeah, I mean, so you know, you've got various tiers. So you've got the ministers, the government bureaucrats at the top making decision-making policy. Then underneath them, you've got the heads of the military. They're political, so they buy into whatever narrative they're told. That's their job. If they dissented, there would be chaos and everything would collapse. So they toe the line. Some of them, when they leave, do dissent, but while they're there, they can't, so they don't. And then you've got sort of senior management within the army and the various forces. And then below them, you've got the people that make it happen, which are the troops, the men on the ground, the women on the ground with weapons that go and do stuff. You know, all British Storm Shadow cruise missiles are fired by British troops. We would say, oh, you know, we're just helping a friend. We're not doing anything. The targets in Russia or wherever are selected and chosen by Britain and US and NATO personnel. So we're involved. The configuration of the warheads and the weapons are done by British troops. And there isn't a button that you press that launches it. It's not a big red button. You press it and missile goes off. That configuration is done by British troops. But we say it's pressed by somebody else. So it's nothing to do with us. Well, that's nonsense. If I had a gun and I held somebody down and did everything I did, and then somebody else pulled the trigger, but I did everything to facilitate that, I'm involved in that killing. I'm involved in that issue, if that makes sense, whatever you want to call it. So we tried to play, oh, you know, we're just coming to the aid of a friend. You know, Russia, let's make this really clear, because I get so much abuse on this. Russia, I don't agree with Russia invading Ukraine. I don't, you know, I'm absolutely against that. We all know the reasons why they did that, but nonetheless, we're against them doing that. But the troops on the ground, you know, we were discussing, you know, as I said, over a beer and a curry on Thursday night, you know, can we win? Can we put, well, you know, and then I asked that question and the $1 million question comes back and we'll define winning. I say pushing, right, as Lloyd Austin would say in the States, we need to push Russia out of Ukraine. That is winning. Well, that's never going to happen. That's absolutely never going to happen. They don't have the manpower. They don't have the people. It's not physically possible. But, you know, all the people above have bought into, I don't want to say the Kool-Aid, but bought into the narrative. We're all NATO, we're all singing the NATO hymn. So we all say the same thing. I mean, the objective is to weaken Russia so that they can go for China. And that came from the
But
MOD.
now that British official that we just showed on the Sky News piece there, I mean, he said, at least in the first part of his statement, you know, we are keenly aware of the potential for retaliation, right? And obviously it stands to reason just on a human level that if somebody's getting punched in the face, sooner or later they're going to shoot a punch back. They're not going to just sit there and allow themselves to be hit because, you know, the very, very, you talk about cigarette paper thin fiction that we're not involved and we have nothing to do with this is ridiculous. And that may work for the Western audiences. When people say we're not involved with that, it could work for the Western audiences. It doesn't work for Russia. And I want to underscore something that you said and just show you how dramatically ridiculous it is when it's said out loud when Jen Stoltenberg talks about how we're actually not involved in the war in Russia and therefore they have no rights. Watch this.
So Russia has no right whatsoever to react against NATO allies providing support to Ukraine. We are not party to the conflict. We don't have troops in Ukraine. But what we are doing is that we are helping Ukraine to uphold the right for self-defense. Russia has violated international law. They have attacked another country, Ukraine. And according to international law and basic, as I say, ethics standards, you have the right to defend yourself when you are attacked. And Ukraine is attacked. And they're defending themselves, and we are helping them to uphold that right.
Okay, but does he not see the incredibly contradictory statement that Ukraine has the right to defend if it's attacked, and then you're giving weapons and ammunition to Ukraine to attack into Russia, and then with your mouth you say, but they don't have any right to respond back. Now, that may work in the Western people's media. It's not going to work in Russia. So again, I get back to the British mentality and the leader level. Aren't they worried that the thin, paper thin excuses aren't going to fly in Russia and that they may end up attacking British assets somewhere?
Well, he's a liar. He's a liar. So if you look at exactly what he said word for word, and I'm trying to be really fair, what he said was reasonable. So Vladimir Putin has just invaded another country for reasons unknown. I don't know why. I don't know we do because he's big, bad, evil, and all the rest of it. They have a right to defend themselves, which they do, and we're just trying to help some friends out. We're just good people. We just want to help some friends. If you look at it like that, it's a perfectly reasonable thing to say. So when he says we're not party to the conflict, we're just helping out. Well, I know British soldiers that have been in Ukraine. I know what happened where, what weapons went in, how they got in. And if I know that, he knows that. So he's being less than generous with the truth. So if he wants to go out and be an ambassador and representative, which he is, he's the head of the organization, at least have a measure of integrity of what's going on. He's a liar. So what he said was completely untrue. But the British people, going back to what I said, are apathetic. And, you know, you've got the whole of the British media.
Okay, I can get with the British people being apathetic, but not the leaders who are actually responsible for actions that could rebound against them. That's the part I don't understand.
Well, I think they know that Russia is not going to be firing missiles into Great Britain. That's not going to be happening. I don't believe that for 1 second. They know that. But will Russia start hitting or potentially start hitting targets in and around the area that we're associated with? The answer is yes. I mean, British soldiers have been killed in Ukraine. And it's all sort of it's not reported for a start, but it's all covered up, and they died in training accidents and all this kind of stuff. So, you know, we are already losing men, largely men. I say men and women, but it is largely men out there, not large numbers, but British soldiers are and have been killed out there. So it's a game, isn't it? It's a big, big game. And what's happened is the NATO narrative of, I mean, here's a great example. I've said it before and I'll say it again. The head of MI6 said that not only is Ukraine winning, it's taken back more land than Russia had taken in the whole offensive. So they've got this narrative that very senior people in positions of responsibility have put out, and they can't change that. How can they change that? So they just got to keep singing from the same hymn sheet, even though they know it's not true. Does that make sense?
Okay. Well, let me tell you something that doesn't make sense, because here's you've opened up a perfect issue here. So on the one hand, Russia is so weak that Ukraine has taken back more territory than the Russians have taken. Then explain to me why outgoing General Sanders came on and said, "Holy cow, if we don't start getting ready right now, we're going to have a war with Russia within 3 to 5 years." Gary, if you can throw that headline up there. Yeah, he is stark warning. He says on his way out, we have 5 years to get ready for war. And then he says it later out, it could be 3 to 5. And in an interview with the Times, Sir Patrick described the current situation as dangerous a moment as any time that we faced since 1945, and then labeled China, Russia, Iran as the new Axis powers. He went on to say, or the article went on to say as well, it says that while Sir Patrick has predicted that World War III could erupt within 5 to 6 years, another politician has suggested it could happen even sooner, within 3 to 4 months. Earlier this year, in an interview with WW3, Serbian President Aleksandar Vučić described stark outlook when he questioned about the potential for war. "I believe we are not far from it, not more than 3 or 4 months, and there is a danger to happen even before that. We are getting closer to real disaster. Who is ready to lose 1 million, 2 million, 5 million, 10 million, and 50 million people? I'm not ready to lose a single man, and it won't. I don't want to participate in that." But what are these people talking about if at the same time Russia is so weak that it can't even defend against a single Ukrainian military that that it has no allies, no functional allies, but that now then war's coming in 3 to 5 years or 3 to 4 months? How does those things that are contradictory work?
They don't work. They don't work. But there's no press asking. There's no mainstream media exercising some critical thinking, which you've just done there, and asking these questions. You've got a compliant media. So it goes back to an apathetic public that's not thinking, because they're fed up of everything, but they are being fed this line. And there's no reason. I mean, everyone, I'm a golden oldie, but I'm still relatively young. But there are people of an age, because of the Cold War, that still think Russia is the Soviet Union. I've said this to you before on previous podcasts, where I've been at events with the Royal Air Force, where I'm talking to fighter pilots, young. I mean, I'm 54, so young men in their 30s, smart, intelligent, and they were telling me that the Russian soldiers, when they join, because they are so poor and poorly equipped, they bring their own shoes and boots. And then later on in the conversation, they were telling me that in the Black Sea at night, when they're out on patrols in their fighter planes, they're watching cruise missiles coming out of the sea. And it's the most amazing sight. And a guy had a video showing these missiles coming out, shooting stars coming out of the sea at night. And it was the most awe-inspiring thing that he'd ever seen. And I said, well, they've got money for that. What about shoes? And he said, oh, the reason they can't afford shoes because they spend all their money on missiles. And I was thinking, can't you hear yourself? Can't you hear yourself? So, they're believers. They're believers. And, if you're in that bubble, if everybody exercised critical thinking skills, things will start to fall apart. So they don't.
When you say fall apart, you mean that they would start to get corrected, right?
Well, they will. I don't know if they will. You don't want dissent. I mean, I'm not military man, but you don't want dissent in the ranks in an army. I mean, just common sense says that. It has to be cohesive and work together. But one of the things that was said on Thursday night was a major general, someone very senior, came down and said, look, like you've just said and shown in these headlines, that we need to start preparing for war. Well, one of the NATO trainers, special forces, said to me, we prepare for war every day. That's our job. Every day when we go to work, we do preparation. It's not like, oh, as of next week, we're going to start preparing for war.
Right.
We do this every day. We do this every single day. But now there's a concerted effort. Now we're going to prepare for war. Well, what have we been doing? I said that to him. Right. He said, yeah, he said the same thing. He said to his boss, well, we do that every day. Well, now we're really going to prepare for war. Now it's real. Now it's not pretend. And it's just insane. It's just insane. However, there may be a change of policy in America.
Indeed, there could be, and I would be curious to see. We'll talk about that in a little bit about what would happen if President Trump comes in, which seems to be a lot more likely today than it was. I don't know, than about a week ago.
Yeah.
But we'll talk about that separately. I want to stick with where you are right now, though. So I wonder if you can just kind of educate me a little bit. Historically, in the UK, and you have quite a few years of history in the past, have there been any similar periods where the people were apathetic, the government was doing what it was, and then something changed, that they were awakened from their apathy? And is that possible from some sort of just intellectual awakening and their eyes are open, or does it only come after there's been some sort of catastrophic punch where they lost something, whether it was a war or something similar? What could change the dynamics here, or can anything change it?
I think this sort of addresses your question. So talking to the French diplomat on Sunday afternoon, she was teasing me about Britain being much more subservient to the States. And she gave me a really good example, a tangible. So should we go back 20 years ago to the first Iraq war? She said France refused to get involved, and so did Germany, whereas Britain was straight there. And in America, there was "Don't buy French wine," and they're not on board, and all this kind of stuff. So you then had some independence within Europe, within those countries, whereas we obviously are the lapdogs and we do everything that we're told. Was now France and Germany are gung ho and they're ready for war. I mean, it shows you the change in governments and in that mentality and culture in a fairly short period of time. So unless something catastrophic happens, I don't know if I should say this. I mentioned this to you, I think in a WhatsApp message. One of the things that muted on the table is, because Ukraine is losing so badly and Trump's not in power, will something terrible happen over in that area, in that vicinity, that will be blamed immediately on Putin? Some sort of false flag attack or something like that. I just wouldn't put it past him. You say, well, that's conspiracy. But yeah, it is conspiracy. But those things do happen and have happened. And we just hope something like that doesn't happen. But something big has to happen to change our governments. Now we're not on a path to changing our government because we've just done it, and we've got the same nonsense as we've illustrated within our conversation. What I'm hoping for, that if Trump gets in, he's made it very, very clear that he is against the whole Russia-Ukraine war, and if he kills funding for it, it stops. Because it is America. It's not NATO, it's America. And NATO will do whatever America, and all of us will jump on board. All of a sudden, the British government will be looking for peace. One of our colleagues, somebody we both know, a mutual friend, Ian Proud, former British diplomat who's based in Moscow. When you walk into the Foreign Office in London, there's a big painting, picture on the wall, mural, and it says Britain, since whatever the date is, has had the best foreign service on the planet. Diplomacy. We just talk to people. Whatever's going on, however bad it is, we talk and we find resolutions, we find solutions. Well, Britain has a policy of not talking to Russia. So as Ian says, Britain talks about Russia, but doesn't talk to Russia. And we get all of our information secondhand from the French, the Germans, and the Americans, which is just absolutely insane.
Well, insane. We don't have any talk with Russia either right now, except for very rare occasions, like with Secretary of Defense Austin the other day. So we're also getting it secondhand. So that's not helpful.
It's a crazy state of events. So a change in the States. Well, we're there, aren't we? Whatever happens with the policy change in America, we're on board for that change. We're not going to suddenly become independently minded.
Well, yeah, and I mean, let's just look at a couple of different dynamics. You brought two of them up. I want to look at those in the remainder of the time we have here. Two things. First of all, whether something on the battlefield happens in between now and, say, November 5th, when the American election comes in, that could change things. Now, I never put it past anybody's side, ours included, that maybe someone may take some action to like lock us into a conflict with Russia so that it doesn't matter who gets elected in November because we're going to be already in there. So that's one possibility. The second possibility is that Russia genuinely does do something. And we've had lots of information and evidence on the battlefield that Putin is actually getting ready to launch some bigger offensive than one he's been doing for the majority of this year, which could actually change the dynamics on the ground, could actually push Ukraine back. There's a force of somewhere around a total of 300,000 Russian troops that are not in contact within range of the border, at various different spots. So whether that's a strategic reserve, whether that's something that's used for an offensive that's coming up, we don't know. We do have some evidence that Viktor Orban, after meeting with Putin, came back and he said he's afraid that the next 2 or 3 months are going to be very bloody, implying he knows something. And of course, he talked to Zelensky before that. There's Ukrainian statements that they're going to start an offensive of their own in the August timeframe, which would be suicide and slaughter for their people, but it may still happen. So militarily, there's a lot of things that could happen.
Yeah, no, of course. So, as I said, I'm not a military man, so hopefully I try and apply some critical thinking and some common sense. So, all of this stuff, Russia's weak. They tried to take little Ukraine, they couldn't do it. Well, if they wanted to do it, they could do it, and they could bomb it to kingdom come. If the Americans were going in there, the Americans would flatten the place. So Russia hasn't done that. So we are now. So we're in July. We've got the elections in November. So we're talking about a fairly short, narrow passage of time. So in that little window, is Putin going to go for all-out war when there's a really good chance, not a guarantee, but a good chance that if Donald Trump comes in November, we are then seeing light at the end of the tunnel, some sort of peace negotiation, some kind of peace. So you just have to then think, I don't know Putin. All I know about Putin is bad stuff, because that's all I've ever heard. But I've, tried to educate myself by looking and seeing different perspectives. So is Putin now going to launch an all-out offensive and go hammer and tail in these few months, or will he just ride this short storm to potential peace talks? And I think I really do believe, and I'm happy to be wrong, unfortunately, but I really want to be right, that he will ride the storm until the election and see what happens. And I hope nobody takes. Well,
there's certainly a lot of plausibility there, and that just got a big boost yesterday when Trump announced his vice presidential candidate is going to be J.D. Vance, the U.S. Senator J.D. Vance, who I think we've even talked about a time or two on this show, many times actually in the past, that he is an absolute advocate for negotiated settlement, even more so than Trump. And he has been really adamant, especially toward the end of last year, about laying out the reasons why that there is no military solution. There's no viable path for Ukraine. So it doesn't make any sense to do anything else. Now that he's the vice presidential candidate over any of the other guys who were a lot more muted on the subject, I think that gives lots of strong signals both to Putin and to Zelensky, for that matter. So I'm real interested in seeing how that dynamic is going to play out over the next few months as well.
Yeah, no, I think you're right. I think that's exactly where we are with it. We've got that short window. We've got that short period of time. If he wanted an all-out offensive to do all the things that everyone says he's going to do,
and actually, let me ask you this question. Let me be a little more specific. From the British side, given all the stuff that you've talked about, how they will basically follow whatever we say in the lead here, they can see the tea leaves too. They can see the political winds have shifted dramatically, both because of what happened in Pennsylvania with Trump himself, and now then in Milwaukee with the selection of this new vice presidential candidate. They can see the polls. Might they do anything different between now and then, or will they still just stay, hey, whatever Biden says, that's what we're going to do, irrespective of that? How do you think that might play out?
Yeah, they'll do whatever Biden says. Well, they have to, because what's the alternative? So, sorry, we're not going to follow you for a little bit because we're not sure what's going to happen. No, they've swallowed the Kool-Aid. they follow the narrative. Russia's weak. We need to keep stoking them and pushing them out, and all this kind of stuff. But I was really pleased yesterday. I'll tell you why. Because I genuinely thought, they're going to have another go at Trump. Someone's going to have another go. Sadly, I pray that I'm wrong for all the obvious reasons. But when he chose JD Vance, who's got this really strong anti-war, anti-Russia, Ukraine war perspective, if they do take out Trump, and I pray that never happens, at least there's somebody there that's still going to follow that perspective of trying to get peace. Because it doesn't matter how, I'm going to say this to people all the time, how do all wars end? And they go, well, it depends on what you want. No. How do wars end? All wars, irrespective of the positions, they all end in peace talks, the start of peace talks, and so forth. So let's just stop the killing and talk. But we can't do that. It's absolutely crazy. Absolutely crazy. Because they've put this very, very strong narrative out. Russia's weak. We just a little bit more, a few more weapons, a few more dead. We will win. Whatever winning looks like. It's just never going to happen. But fortunately, let's just see what happens in November.
Yeah,
we're in the hands of the gods.
We are. We'll see how that works out there. And obviously, because these things are all so intertwined. What happens in one place has a lot of implications for the other. What happens in UK actually ultimately can have ramifications for the US, like with the use of the storm shadow there and what Russia may do. And obviously everything that happens in the US has a lot of implications for the UK. So we're going to keep watching a lot of this, and we're going to keep coming back to you and getting updated information as these things develop. But Ian, is that fuel? Is that NATO fuel? What is that?
NATO gin.
So it's the same thing. So it is fuel. Tell us what is that? What are you showing us?
So yeah, I mean, we don't sell it. It's not for sale. It's not commercially available. But we, go to NATO events and serve gin and tonics to NATO staff, and it's for them. So it's their own gin.
and now you've got some others there. I think you had something with some artwork on top of it. What was that?
No,
I want to see that.
So we make this for the Ministry of Defence, and it's got a little bear skin on there. And I see what's really funny. This bear skin is, and I promise you, it's not made in Japan or in Hong Kong or in China. This little bear skin that sits on the top of the bottle, this was a Jubilee edition gin that we made. This little bear skin is handmade on Whitehall, about 80 meters from the Prime Minister's office. I know the lady that sits there in her lunch hour just making these, and they just sit on top. And all of the proceeds of this go to good causes. It goes to a military charity. It goes for good causes. So it's all good fun.
Well, that's awesome. Yeah, I really, really appreciate seeing that stuff. It's also really cool. I'd like to have one next time I come there. See if you can get me a bottle.
Of course.
Very good. And so thank you all for joining us today. We always appreciate you, folks. You can count on us giving you the unambiguous truth. We're not going to hold anything back from you. We're going to have Larry Johnson on later today at 3:00. Man, I'm sure we're going to be talking a lot of stuff about the JD Vance a little bit more. We're going to be giving you an update on what's been happening with the investigation and the assassination attempt of Trump. All kinds of great stuff. Larry always brings great insights. You're not going to want to miss that. 3:00 this afternoon, Daniel Davis Deep Dive, and we will see you then.